Welcome back, my dears. Let's review some of the things we learned about nouns last time. Remember that one way to explain an abstract noun is to say it's something you can think about but can't touch. Here's an example. A 5-year-old's mom's pretty crystal kitten collection. Okay, that's one of Grammar Granny's lame jokes that she found on the internet. Crystal kittens aren't really abstract, but you remember the real difference between concrete and abstract nouns, right? Of course you do. Now, today, my dears, we're going to learn about verbs. Verbs are my favorite part of the sentence. That's where the action is. Some people call verbs the muscles of our language. They're the only part of speech that can be a whole sentence all by itself. Take the sentence, eat. Maybe something your own dear sweet granny says to you now and then. Or sit, which you might say to your doggie. Eat and sit are verbs, and each one can act as a whole sentence. The subject of the sentence, the one doing the action, isn't said out loud, but it's understood. It's whoever is being spoken to. This kind of sentence is called an imperative. It's a command for the listener to do something, and all it takes to work is one of our good, strong action verbs. We'll talk a little more about imperatives later on. Now, there are some verbs that are more metaphysical than muscular. Remember when we talked about verbs before, we said they can be actions or states of being. Some verbs don't talk about doing, they just talk about being. So if I say, my kitty is black, I'm not talking about what she does, just the state of her being, right? Can you think of some other verbs that talk about states of being? Here are some. The verb to be is the most common verb of this type. There are different forms of the verb to be, like am, are, is, was, were, be, being, and been. There are some other verbs too that have this same function. Verbs like become, seem, appear, look, sound, smell, taste, feel, and get. You might say that these verbs act like an equal sign or a link between the subject and the predicate of the sentence. So if I say, my kitty is black, I'm saying my kitty equals black. Or if I say, my kitty is sick, I'm saying my kitty is linked to sick. These state of being verbs are sometimes called copulas. So now we know two different kinds of verbs, my dears. Action verbs and state of being or copula verbs. Both of these kinds of verbs can be the main verb of a sentence. Let's see if you can tell the difference. Who is using an action verb? The math teacher, who says fractions speak louder than verbs? Or the English teacher, who says verbs are stronger than articles? If you said the math teacher, have a cookie. The English teacher was using the copula. Now that we see that there are two kinds of verbs, let's make it more complicated. In addition to main verbs, there's another type. These are the helping or auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs can't make a sentence all on their own. They just help the main verb out. In English, we have several different kinds of auxiliary verbs. The be family, which includes am, are, is, was, were, be, being, and been. The have family has have, has, and had. The do family has do, does, and did. And the modals, which are can, will, shall, may, could, would, should, must, and might. And finally, there's the semi-auxiliaries, gonna, wanna, gotta, have-to, supposed-to, let's, and lemme. We'll talk more about those later. Now, you may be thinking, oh, phooey. I remember hearing about all this in high school, but I don't remember any of it. Why do I need to know it anyway? Well, not to worry, my dears. Grammar Granny is going to sort it all out for you. But you're right to ask, why do I need to know? And here's the reason. In English, Auxiliary verbs do a lot of work in making sentences make grammatical sense. And when little kiddies are learning language, it takes them a while to sort out the whole auxiliary verb system. They make mistakes and leave things out all through the preschool years. But by the time they get to kindergarten, most of them have straightened most of it out. Now, our kiddos with language problems, it takes them a lot longer. Some are still having trouble, even in middle school. So it's important for us to know what they need to learn and how typical kids learn it, so we can help our language impaired kids get the rules they have trouble learning on their own. All right, let's figure them out. You might be surprised to see the be verbs here again, because we just said that they were copulous. They are, but be verbs have two different jobs in English. Sometimes they're main verbs, acting as copulas and functioning like an equal sign or a link between the subject and the predicate. But sometimes they're not copulas. Then they are auxiliaries, helping the main verb express a meaning of ongoing action in the present tense. Of course, there's a fancy way to say this, the present progressive tense. It's like when we say, he is walking to school, or they are listening to music. Can you think of some other examples of be verbs helping to form the present progressive tense? If you thought of 3 examples, have a cookie. And think now about the main verbs that follow the be verb in these sentences. Can you think of something they all have in common? He is walking to school. They are listening to music. If you said they end in ing, have 2 cookies. Great observation. And once you notice this, it gets really easy to figure out if be is acting like a copula or an auxiliary in a sentence. If one of our forms of be, remember, am, are, is, was, were, be, being, been, if one of them is followed by a verb ending in ing, it's an auxiliary. It's not a copula. Easy as pie. Now, sometimes you might hear people talking about contractible and uncontractible forms of be. That's because in the early days of studying child language, some of the founders of the field thought this distinction might be important, and that one of these forms might appear before the other in child language development. These days we don't worry so much about that distinction, but just in case you're curious, contractible forms are ones that can be contracted. They don't have to be, they just can be. Some samples would include studying is not a contraction of student dying, studying isn't a contraction of student dying, or we are studying for the voice exam by avoiding caffeine. We're studying for the voice exam by avoiding caffeine. But uncontractable forms are the ones where making a contraction would just be ungrammatical. For example, a sentence like, it's what it is. We can't say it's what it's. Or, he was eating pineapple pizza. Yuck. Using be forms to express the present progressive is one of the first steps typical kids take in learning to use auxiliaries in English. But still, they don't get the whole business right all at once. We can see mistakes in some typical kiddos through the preschool years, and in our kids with language impairments for much longer. That's why we need to understand how be forms work in English, so that we can help our kiddies learn to use them for all the purposes they serve in our language. Our next set of auxiliary verbs are the modals. Modal auxiliaries join with the main verb to indicate a speaker's mood or state of mind, such as necessity, uncertainty, ability, intention, or permission. Here are the modal verbs. In the present tense, there's can, will, shall, and may. In the past tense, there's could, would, should, must, and might. Now, surprisingly enough, the present tense modals, especially can and will, are learned quite early in normal development, although the past tense group takes longer. Again, we need to know this because as we look at the language our kiddos use, the way they use modal auxiliaries is a good yardstick of how far along they are in auxiliary development. And if they're lagging behind, modeling and practicing uses of modals in games and stories can be a great way to help their language grow. And after all, That's our job. The have family of verbs, have, has, and had, is our next auxiliary. Remember we said that when verbs follow be, they take the present participle form of the verb. Well, when they follow have, has, or had, they take a different verb form, the past participle. These are used to express actions that are already completed. Most past participles end in either ed or en. For example, we could say, I play guitar badly, or I have played guitar, but badly. He dives from cliffs, or he has dived from cliffs without breaking his neck. Last year, I drove to my granny's. I had driven to my granny's last year. We eat ice cream only on Sundays. We had eaten ice cream, so it must have been Sunday. But of course there are exceptions. We say they buy groceries on Amazon, or they had bought groceries on Amazon. You try it. Turn these sentences into ones with forms of have and the past participle. I saw the viral video of people eating Tide Pods. Yesterday, my French professor spoke only French in class. A dangling participle walks into a bar. If you said, had your French teacher spoken only French yesterday? Have you seen the viral video? Has the dangling participle walked into the bar? Then good for you. Have a cookie. Now, I wonder if you noticed anything funny about my last invitation to have a cookie. Look again. Do you see that in have a cookie, have is not followed by a past participle form of the verb? Well, Grammar Granny is sorry to have to tell you this, my dears, but just like be, our have family also has two different jobs in English. One job is to help past participles express completed action. Another is to talk about possession. So we might say, have a cookie. I have two sisters. She has a birthday today. The demon had an arrest record for possession. You have a cute puppy. They took everything we had. Can you think of some examples of using the have family verbs to talk about possession? Stop the video for a minute and think of a few. Now, how can you tell if have family words are acting as main verbs or auxiliaries? Not quite as easily as for be, but not impossible either. Remember that if forms of have are talking about possession, they are main verbs. If they're followed by past participles, which usually end in ed or en, then they're auxiliaries. In which of these sentences are the have forms auxiliaries? I have an idea. He has gotten into his first choice school. She wished for a fish. Are we having fun yet? We have spoken about this before. I had a guinea pig for my first pet. Now, if you said he has gotten into his first choice school, she had wished for a fish, we have spoken about this before, you earned a break. Come and see Grammar Granny again real soon. Bye now.